A 52-hour maximum work week is already in place in Korea's public sector and companies with more than 300 employees. But the bus industry will be implementing that policy a bit later, starting this July. And as the date nears, unionized bus drivers in Korea are demanding measures to avoid reduction in their income. Fortunately, bus drivers across Korea have either canceled or put off their planned strike, but there are remaining issues that need to be resolved for a soft landing of the 52-hour policy. Let's sit down with an expert for further discussion, but first, we turn to Arirang's Yoon Jung-min for the latest developments.
Major bus unions across South Korea, including those in Seoul, reached a deal with management, most of them overnight after heated hours-long negotiations that started on Tuesday afternoon. They agreed to a salary hike of 3.6% for drivers and to gradually extend the retirement age by 2 years from 61 to 63. Bus unions in most regions, including Busan, Incheon, Chungcheongnam-do Province, and Gyeonggi-do Province, reached a deal either overnight or a day earlier. Many citizens say they are relieved to hear the news.
I was worried last night due to the possible bus strike because it would take me longer to get to work. But when I found out this morning that the strike was cancelled, I was relieved.
I'm heading to an amusement park with my friends. We were going to take the subway instead, but finally we can take the bus.
The bus unions in Gyeonggi-do Province couldn't completely reach a deal but decided to delay the strike until the end of May while continuing dialogue with management. Just a day earlier, the Transport Ministry announced that the government will increase bus fares by 200 Korean won, or about 17 cents, starting with routes in Gyeonggi-do Province sometime in September. The government will also implement a semi-public bus management system, which means the buses will be managed partially by the government. The bus unions had been demanding a wage hike for drivers and more support from the government, claiming they will be paid less if work hours decrease due to the mandatory 52-hour work week system. The government cut the maximum work hours from 68 to 52 per week last year, and companies with more than 300 employees must abide by the rule. Bus companies were granted a one-year grace period, which expires in July. Much of the drivers' concerns are eased due to the wage hike, but the burden on the public, especially those in the lower income brackets, seems inevitable as the bus fares will go up in many cities. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
For more on this, we're joined by Dr. Se-ryeon, professor at Gyeonggi University. Good to have you back.
Good to be here.
So bus drivers stationed in different regions are making different demands, but looking at the big picture, it boils down to money.
Right.
Now, with the implementation of the 52-hour maximum work week, which will be implemented in the bus industry starting this July,
right,
bus drivers will have to suffer a reduction in their income. Could you first elaborate for us why that is?
Right. The 52 work week is an exception for the bus drivers because everything else has been implemented about a year ago, but there were exceptions, including the bus drivers. So it's a delayed implementation. But in terms of working hours, Korea has been notorious having a long work hours. I think the last time I checked, we were number 2 in the OECD countries by a wide margin. So there was a kind of social need, a policy need to reduce that level of overworking. But in terms of how to implement that, I think that there has been kind of lack of preparation to do it because it was a wholesale implemented last year and the bus drivers having a brunt of it. The key to the bus driver is that their wage structure is somewhat like this, a 50% basic pay plus the fees or the money that comes in depending on how many hours they work. So reducing the maximum hours from 68 hours to 52 hours, so 16-hour decrease, means the reduction in wages. Now, the government has been saying that, well, many bus companies have already implemented 52-hour week, so wage may not be the sole issue. But the bus drivers has been saying that even so, the weekend hours, overtime pay has not been regularly paid. So I think there is a concern for the wages. And if you think that because of the reduced pay, they should get less, I think the wage earners would say, well, our basic income level has to be guaranteed no matter how many hours we work.
Now, as you've mentioned, the 52-hour work week is already in place in Korea's public sector, as well as large Korean firms that with more than 300 employees.
Right.
Now, why are bus drivers particularly against this 52-hour policy?
There are a number of reasons. One, the nature of the work is a little bit different for bus drivers. Now, in other work, if you improve the productivity of your work, then maybe it's natural that you can reduce the work hours. But for bus drivers, they have to be on the seat or driving the bus a certain amount of hours. So there's not much of a flexibility there. I think the bigger problem is that the bus industry has been in the red for quite a while. It's a recurring problem. So in terms of the severity of the economic pressure, I think the bus drivers has been getting the large amount of that. And plus, I think the bus drivers are better organized in national level, so their negotiation power is greater, so they can set the time and date and tell them that everybody will walk out. So in terms of threat level, probably it's more formidable.
Not all regions have reached a deal in terms of wage hike. Seoul, Busan, and Incheon reached an agreement, while Gyeonggi-do Province and Chungcheongnam-do Province, as well as Sejong City, are set to make further negotiations with the management. Now, is there a reason why these regions are having more difficulties in settling an agreement?
Right. The labor union is nationally organized, but those bus drivers have to negotiate with each municipal governments, and each government has different economic situations and different price levels in that region. For example, Seoul, most popular city in Seoul, has the income, tax income level far superior than others. So they have easier time to meet the demands if they decide to use the public or taxpayers' money to stop up the gap. But other municipalities are probably not as flexible and not as robustly capable of using the taxpayers' money. So in that sense, everybody has to come up with different solutions. That's why Gyeonggi-do decided to hike the bus fares, whereas Seoul did not.
So circumstances vary according to the regions. Now, among the regions that are yet to reach a deal with the management, Gyeonggi-do by far has the largest number of commuters. And the government in the Gyeonggi-do Province yesterday said they plan to raise the bus fares while also seeking for a semi-public operation of the red buses, which are the intercity or express buses. What do you make of this announcement?
I think in a way it makes sense because I mentioned kind of a big deficit in their incomes. Gyeonggi-do has been the biggest, actually, and they had more need to see that there is a financial solution to do it, and their solution is to raise the bus fares. And probably people criticize that too. In terms of solutions, either they could raise the bus fares so that those people who are riding the bus will finance the stop, the gaps, or in Seoul's case, they will just decide to keep the level as it is, but also give some subsidies to the bus companies. And now, in that sense, not the riders, but the taxpayers in general would be burdening that gap. So Gyeonggi-do had the choice probably, but as I mentioned, there's a difference between the economic capacities of different municipalities. So Gyeonggi-do probably was the inevitable choice to do that. But the rate of hike is pretty steep. In about 4 or 5 years, they've raised it the fares by 50%, which seems pretty excessive. I think we can explain that to the kind of organized power of the labor unions there.
Now, on a related note, bus unions are demanding all local governments to across the nation to pick up the semi-public operational system for the city buses. Could
Right.
this be a viable solution?
To an extent, to explain what the semi-public system is, if you leave the bus business, so to speak, to a totally market-driven system, probably you will see a lot of services, a lot of the buses going in a busy section, leaving those not the areas where not many passengers are there, completely neglected or somewhat neglected. So in that sense, if you make that a kind of semi-public section, probably the government will have a better idea of how to sparse those services so that everybody get the serviced, this regardless of the profitability level. So we have implemented that system in many places, and especially Seoul as well. But what we have also observed is that there are some moral hazards issues because sometimes if your business does not depend on the services to the customers and it comes from the government, then unfortunately some governments would see that as a blind money or money not to be earned but grabbed. So better audit system is a very key issue, but more fundamentally, I think there has to be a smart mix between what needs to be public, in the public domain and what requires a competition in the market system.
Bus strikes are often reported in other parts of the world as well. Could you give us some examples of how other countries have resolved the conflict between bus drivers and the management?
Well, in many countries, this is kind of a problem, but I think that Seoul has been more of a problem because of the seeming the disconnect between other modes of public transportation. I think that what I see lacking is that you have to regard all the public transportation system as a contextual part of the services that people enjoy. For example, Korea does not really have a robust ride-share, car-share systems which complement the public transportation system of other countries. So in that sense, we're not really looking at the whole picture, and if we kind of resort to looking at each sector as it's on its own to be negotiated and to be dealt with, probably it's going to be a long drawn-out process with a lot of duplications.
The bus industry is not the only industry making efforts to adapt to the 52-hour policy. And there are concerns that the bus strike, which will likely result in an increase in bus fares, could set some kind of a precedent to other industries. What are some ways to prevent potential strikes in other industries?
I think the better negotiation would be one. Now, what I mean by better negotiation is in the bus driver's case as well. Last year, there was an agreement between the companies and laborers and the government agencies, government department actually. But different department of the government has opposed to some of the agreements there, so reneging the whole agreement and precipitating this bus strike. So in that sense, the government department has to work together and incorporating looking at the whole system as a public transportation context. I think we can come up with better solutions. Now, whenever we talk about reducing the work hours, the productivity has to be part of the discussion. And this government sometimes, for whatever reasons, the campaign promises come to a fore, which is laudable, but sometimes it's implemented without getting all the dots, and T's and dots taken care of. So in that sense, I think that the better preparation for other sectors should be a groundwork before introducing certain policies.
All right, Dr. Song, thank you as always for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow.